membership, because if I'm sure last time around, Richard, I think you had one or two from South America, didn't you?
Sorry, Tony, I missed that.
Did you not have people on for the last one with Michael Finley from South America?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a long time ago, isn't it?
Hey guys.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but
okay.
Yeah, just we've gone live, so the room is filling up now. I'll just give a minute or so just to let everybody go ahead and get logged in. And before I introduce our panelists, I will just thank everybody, you know, for registering and supporting this event. Of course, the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada, you know, our mission is to provide the best quality of coach education and coaching development resources, and that includes, you know, everything like this that we're doing online and in person, and all kinds of other benefits to members and to coaches, both across the country and outside of Canada too. And you know, we're thrilled to have this opportunity to put this little interview together. We'll give it just another minute here, just to see if we can get anybody else logged in. Looking like the room is really starting to fill up, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists and get us started. All right, so once again, welcome to Behind the Bench, the NSCAC's weekly webinar series. And this time we've got a real special one for you. The title is Remembering Canada's 1986 World Cup Team, and that's exactly what we're going to try to do here. And of course, that being the only Canadian men's national team to qualify for a FIFA World Cup back in 1986. And so I'm happy to welcome here the head coach of the team, Tony Waiters. Hello, Tony.
Hi, thanks, Richard. Glad to be a part of it.
Fantastic. And Tony is also the president of the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada, and he's been with us for a long time. And of course, we're happy to have him there. And we have, so for now, we have one of Tony's former players from that team, who's currently the general manager of the Vancouver Whitecaps, and that's Bob Lenarduzzi. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. All right. Carl, we're waiting on him, and we know, unfortunately, we got a message very recently that Paul Dolan is not able to make it. So, you know, while we wait for Carl, you know, hopefully to log on soon, I'll go ahead and just get you started. So this will be, you know, for Tony and of course, Bob, jump in whenever you want, but maybe we can just get started with a little bit of your background in the men's national team, Tony as a player and then as a coach, and Bobby also as a player first and then a coach, and once you've done that, you've introduced yourself a little bit. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about, you know, the start of qualification for the 1986 World Cup and what that was like. So maybe Tony, if you'd like to get us started.
Yeah, last year I went back to Plymouth, which was the club I came to the Whitecaps from, and it was a guy written a book called The Waiters Era, and the 5 years I was there, 4 years were great. The 5th year got me the opportunity to come to Canada, but I got fired. so no regrets, because it's been a very meaningful time to be in Canadian soccer. What I'd like to examine a little bit while we're here, and Bobby's here, Carl will appear shortly, is where we go from here, in the sense that we got to the World Cup in '86, but we haven't been anywhere near it since, apart from when Bob Lenarduzzi was the national coach shortly after '86, and we almost got there. In fact, it was the same formula as today. We would get there. So, what can we do to get our team back to the World Cup stage? The other thing I'd like to find out and ask you, Barry, and others is, when do you think we'll be playing again?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think everyone involved in the sport, and even people outside of the sport, when you look at the interest that was generated by the Bundesliga starting up on the weekend, even people that don't follow soccer were following it with interests and hopes that whatever other sports they're involved in, might start up again. So as for when we start up again, I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to do anything even close to what it was pre-COVID-19, simply because it's going to take the playing side being able to actually get 2 games like they have done in the Bundesliga. But beyond that, in terms of bums and seats, that's not going to happen until we get a long way into the processes that are in place now, and can ensure that people going to sporting events, don't have to be concerned about the virus itself. So I wouldn't even hazard a guess at it. I just think that the fact that that MLS are now in the midst of looking at, and it's out there, looking at a place like Orlando, Disney World, where they have all the pitches, and ESPN are part owners of that, and can broadcast the games. I think that'll be great, because that'll give people at least an opportunity to see their teams on the field, and the rest of the world seems to be following suit. I think it's dependent in each of the countries as to how they've dealt with the virus itself, and some have done a much better job than others. But I think we'll be seeing games. We just won't be seeing any people in the stands.
Yeah.
Good point. And I'll just stop briefly because I see Carl Valentine is here. Welcome, Carl.
Sorry about that. As wingers, we're very quirky, right? Never on time.
As long as you move fast, though, right? Yeah.
Well, that was the only asset I had, so yeah.
It's a trait of people from Manchester.
Yeah, I'll take that as well. Manchester winger, a bad combination.
All right, and I'll mention quickly to everybody that's watching at home. Please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box if you have any questions. We did get some from participants in our audience beforehand, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But feel free, type your questions into the chat box or the Q&A box. And great. So let's talk a little bit about the lead up to 1986 then.
Yeah, from my point of view, I was pleasantly surprised when I got to Vancouver. And as I recall, we played Fort Lauderdale in the first game. Gordon Banks was playing.
Yes.
We lost the sight in one eye.
Mm-hmm.
And we won 2-1. They announced the crowd at, I think, 5,000. But it must have been counting arms, not heads.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were half of that. And that was a trait, wasn't it, at the time?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
People would inflate the crowd to make it look better than it really was. But by the time we finished in was it 85 or 84 when
84.
84.
1984, yeah.
No, there were some crowds, God knows, we were drawing sometimes 30,000. And it's interesting to see what's happening now with the MLS. But I think the game is firmly established as a professional sport in North America. What was the average crowd for the Whitecaps last year, Bob?
I think we were around 18, 19,000. It wasn't one of our better years. Previous to that, we were averaging close to 22,000. But I can recall when you arrived in Vancouver in 1977, and you're right, we were playing in front of friends and family at that time. But you provided a stability and your connection back to where you came from in England, and the network that you had. I can remember when I was at Reading in the 70s, the early 70s, watching the players play that I would eventually play with upon your arrival, and I was well aware of those players like John Samuels, like Kevin Hector, John Craven. So yeah. I knew the quality of player that you were bringing at that time, and ultimately we were rewarded by winning a championship in 1979. Beyond that, I think the principles that you adopted with the Whitecaps, you transitioned to the national team, and we were a very finely tuned machine. We knew exactly where and when we needed to be in situations where we were defending and were very, very difficult to break down. And from a skill perspective, I think we'd be safe in saying we more than likely didn't have the skill of some of the opponents and our opponents in CONCACAF. So what we did, we let them play in their own end, and we dispossess them, and we'd score goals off of turnovers. So again, what you did with the Whitecaps and what we did with the national team and getting to the Olympics and the quarterfinals in '84, and then having unfortunately just 3 games at the World Cup in '86. But I think that we surprised a lot of people by being as competitive as we were.
Right. The other interesting thing from my perspective was that coming in '77, there were very good Canadian players in the Whitecaps. You know, yourself, Bruce Wilson, Bob Belito, Billy Parsons, the rest of the Lenarduzzi family were playing as well. Good players, and it made an enormous difference. I blended it with mainly British players, and you got Carl Valentine. But in the early days, we were known as the English Mafia.
Yes.
and people were not too pleased, but once we started winning games, things changed and we became the Vancouver Whitecaps. But that blend of Canadian players, they were good players. In fact, had it been the rule that we had to play only North American players, we could have put a team out which would have been very competitive.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think you make it's an excellent point as well, because I don't think it was really as appreciated at the time, because we did have, there was a rule to play Canadians, but I think even if there wasn't, the players that played would have played anyway because they were that good. And it's obviously no coincidence that in the North American Soccer League that out of that was produced a very, very good Canadian team. And we said when we qualify again, when's that going to happen? I mean, the NASL and the Canadian Soccer League afterwards, where we were one game away from qualifying for the World Cup. There was no coincidence that it was a breeding ground for Canadian players, and we won a championship because we had a full complement of good Canadian players that complemented the team. But you know, we never felt like that as a young lad coming over, and the game established itself here in Canada and North America. And I spoke to Roger Kenyon and players like that. They never really looked at these players, oh well, they're playing because they're Canadian. They were playing because they earned the right to play.
Absolutely. Now, one of the questions I like to ask is, you're saying, well, where do we go from here? What are we doing? Well, actually, we've not done very much since '86, apart from that next time round when Bobby was the coach, and we nearly made it. But what do we have to do to get the team to the World Cup again? And there's Alfonso Davis is probably now judged to be world class. Would you say?
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's not us saying it. That's the even Jose Mourinho was having a go at Man U for not signing him, and he had said that he wanted to sign him at that time. So
Yeah.
he's impressed people in Europe, and it's not a surprise that he's done as well as he has done. When he came to the club at 14, every time that he went to the next level from U15 to U17s to the reserve team to the senior team, and that was all in the span of probably a season and a half. But every time he went to the next level, he wasn't just another player, he was the best player. And now he's gone to Bayern Munich and he's done exactly the same thing there. So what we need is more Alfonso Davies. So
How do you do that?
And well, that's right. I think, to be fair, Alfonso is probably an anomaly. I'm not sure you're going to get players like him coming along all that often. But from an MLS perspective and from a national team perspective, we just need players to go through the system, and when they arrive at the senior level, whether it's Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, in MLS, is that they're solid MLS players, and then some of them will have the ability to move on. But that's going to benefit our national team program, much like what you see in the United States, which is, I think our best can compete with their best now. What we don't have is we just don't have that depth that they have, and part of that has to do with the size of the country.
Yeah.
When you went to Reading, how old were you?
I was 14 at the time, which was crazy.
Yeah. How did that happen?
I was playing actually senior soccer in a league called the Western Canada Soccer League, one of those semi-pro leagues that are part of the North American professional soccer sports graveyard. That lasted for a season, but I played in that league with the Vancouver Spartans, and the coach at Reading was actually here on holidays and had come to a couple of the sessions, and had said to our coach at the time, is he interested in coming to Reading for a tryout? And so that was Jack Mansell, yes. And so when I knew that was an opportunity, I'd made my mind up. But I was 14, and my parents had immigrated to Canada to give their kids a chance at a better life, and here I was going back the other way. So I had to do some skillful negotiating with them, and finally they agreed to let me go, and it was a great experience.
And your brother Sam went with you?
Yes, he did, but he came back, and I actually came back because I'd broken my ankle, and then I went back and he stayed behind at that time. But I can honestly say that from the point of view of my own development, maybe not skill development, but just being immersed in the game day in, day out. Also understanding the hierarchy of the sport. I turned up early on and was provided or taken to the boot room and was provided with a shoe brush and boots and told that you need to keep those boots clean after training. The players are going to come in, hang them up on the peg. And I thought, this is like, why am I doing this? And I would have to clean out the baths after training. But looking back on it, I knew exactly where I stood at the club. And I do believe that one of the biggest problems that we're dealing with, not just in our own sport, but I think across society, is that there's a lot of entitlement amongst young people. And I think in all industries, they when they start, they're not content with just making your way through the system. They want to get from where they are to the top right away, and that just doesn't happen. And we're in a lot different world than what we're in way back then. But I knew, again, I knew my place at the club, and I would speak when I was spoken to, and I wouldn't I wouldn't be joining in the joking with the senior players, because if you had to go at one of the senior players, he'd soon sort you out. And I actually feel that we missed that.
And how old were you when you came back?
I was 20 years old, and I came back on loan actually to the Whitecaps for 2 years in 75 and 76. And then I decided at that point that it was time to come back. And if it was to be a part of soccer with the Whitecaps, that would have been great. But if it wasn't, then I just needed to get on with my life. And thankfully, it's I've been able to, as I've always said, avoid getting a real job, because I've been involved in something that I love doing at the various levels. And then there's Carl Valentine comes over.
Carl was a different situation than you.
Yes.
You've gone from here to England. Don't think we can do that now. To get enough players to make a decent national team. Mm-hmm. So you go over at 14. That's incredible, really. Carl came in at what? Carl 17, was it?
79.
Yeah.
79. That was the year we won it. It's just a coincidence. So.
No, but you came into.
Oh, to Oldham. Yes. Yeah, I was 17.
And you'd been recruited sort of the conventional route, because you played with Manchester boys. Yeah.
I actually tried out for Stockport County when I was 16 years of age. Yeah. And I went with 2 of my teammates, and at the end of the trial in the summer, 2 of my teammates signed on, and communication was different there. And the coach said I was no good, not brave enough, not strong enough. I needed to go get a job and get on with my life. So that was it at 16. Then at 17, a friend asked me to go to Oldham and get a bit of pocket change training with him, and I did that. And at the end of it, the scout came to the house to meet me and my mum and dad, and I got my first contract, £16 a week, and £8 went to my mum and dad. But yeah, coming to Vancouver, I don't know how Bobby said he loved it. And I mean, I love England. Obviously, I'm from there, my family's there. But going from Vancouver to England, man, that's you've got to.
No, I never said. I said I loved my football, but I've never really suggested that I loved England, and in particular the food. The food was just bad, real bad.
Well, it takes some adjustment to go 14 and go to Reading I knew Jack Mansell quite well. I did a course with him, and I think he knew what he was doing, didn't he?
Oh yeah, no, he was a very, very good coach. He had an interesting manner about him, which I think rubbed some people the wrong way, players and directors at the club, but that didn't seem to bother him.
We were going through a mismanagement course, and there were about 20 of us at University of Loughborough, and we were talking about job description. So Jack Mansell was saying he was responsible for selecting the team, sorting out the training and this, that and the other. But he was also responsible for the cleaning of the lavatories. And we had a good laugh.
Yeah,
He didn't actually get in there and clean them, but he supervised that.
yeah.
But, well, he had a good career, didn't he, Jack?
Yes, he did. He did. Yeah, for sure.
So you know, you and Carl coming out, Carl coming out, were you 19, Carl, when he came?
20, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, he'd been playing then regularly at Oldham for 2 seasons.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
That must have been quite a big decision.
Oh, I still, when people ask me today how I made that decision, because I was still living at home with my 4 sisters. I had not really travelled that much. And when Jimmy Frizzle, the manager of Oldham, come in and said, "Oh look, Vancouver, we accepted a bid from the Vancouver Whitecaps. We sold you, so you've got to meet the manager and hopefully get yourself a good deal." No internet then, no Google.
No.
I didn't know Vancouver was. I knew Canada, but I didn't know where Vancouver was. So you must have been a good salesman. Did you ever sell cars? You must have been a good salesman, because I still to this day, you know, I didn't know anyone in Vancouver. You know, I was doing fairly well at Oldham. I heard some first division teams were looking, but never heard that they came in for me. So it's hard to know why I made the decision to travel to Vancouver, where I didn't know anyone, and start a new life. But it was a great decision, and probably different from Bobby, because I moved from England to this wonderful place in Vancouver. The scenery was great, and we had a fantastic team. I think, as Bobby said,
the ironic thing was Manchester City were interested in you. And you're having a laugh because your mother was not too happy about the fact that I was not encouraging you to go back to Manchester. Did we play City in an exhibition?
Yeah,
game?
we played him in that cup. We played Roma and City, and then we went to New York to play the final game. I think we tied New York, and they won it on points, because I think we tied Roma and they beat Roma. And then there was a reception afterwards, and Malcolm Allison come in, was in the big banquet room and called me over and said, "Would you like to play for City?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." I said, "Okay." He said, "We'll be in touch in 2 weeks." So I never even told anyone. And then when we went back to Vancouver, Mum and Dad, my mum was there, my dad wasn't. And you called me in and said, "Look, I want to be honest with you, Carl. City have come in, they've made an offer for you," and we said no. So I don't know why I told my mum. And then after the game, I remember coming out after the game. I think my mum had had a few drinks, and she had you up against the wall, and she was like, "You've got to let my son go to England. He wants to play in the first division." Come on, Mum. But it's a great story. It's a great story. I have a good laugh.
Malcolm Allison, who I admired greatly, and spent as much time as I could with him on the different courses. What wasn't always ethical, and you know, he should have not have approached you at that time. That's how it goes.
Yeah.
And on reflection, you know, we've talked about this a few times. Your career hasn't been a bad one, has it?
No, I wouldn't change anything for the world. I tell you, wouldn't change it.
Hey, Tony, we could probably continue this hot stove and continue talking about things that that we're interested in, and I hope the listeners are. But there's some interesting questions. One of them is, and I know that you'll love answering this one, is why did we choose to go to St. John's, Newfoundland for the final World Cup qualifier? Well, we didn't know at the time you picked the spot that it would be on that game. But what was the rationale behind going there?
Yeah,
You read my mind, Bobby.
it was very simple. They said the guarantee that they'd fill the stadium. It was funny because we went to Guatemala for the draw, and the Hondurans were. We sat around the table, and what we did, we didn't actually have a draw. We went in a room and sorted out when we could play and how convenient it would be. So our first game was Costa Rica in Ontario. And then it came to the last game, and they said Canada versus Honduras, St. John's, and the Hondurans had a big map of Canada, and they had it on the table, and they started off in Victoria, and come across the waters to Vancouver. They kept on going, and eventually, up in the top right-hand corner, was St. John's, Newfoundland. And what was it? It said it was something in Spanish, and that, the only reason we went there is that the game could have been a nothing game, as you know, because we played Costa Rica to start with, went to Honduras,
Yeah.
then to Costa Rica, and the last game was us against Honduras. And if we could have been out of it. And so the financial consideration was the one that did it.
I'm surprised you buckled to the financial consideration. I thought you would have just held your ground and gone to the spot where you thought we could get the best result, which was ultimately St. John's, because it was incredible.
You're right, and I've been into King George V playing.
Yes, King George, yeah.
And the atmosphere seemed good. I remember Carl came in at the very last minute because we were short of players. Dale Mitchell was injured. Mike Sweeney had been thrown out the previous game, which is a regular occurrence for him. So we brought Carl in, and what I did, I went and looked at the field, and the corners, you had to step up to the corner because
There was a ridge, yeah.
And I filled it in with sand, got them to get sand in, so because we wanted to take in swimming corners. And if you remember, Carl, we tried to get you practicing the corners. We went to Robin Hood Park, was it?
Yeah.
In Ontario, and CBC were there. And Les Wilson had gone into the woods and said he'd seen some Hondurans in there. So we actually went on the Friday to a private school and practiced the corner kicks. And we scored 2 corner kicks.
2 goals off corner kicks, yes. There's a when you talk about St. John's as the destination for that game, there's a great story about Honduran fans that had come over for the game.
Yes.
And so what had happened was they looked at it, St. John's, okay, that's great. So what they did was they ended up in St. John, New Brunswick, and had to actually watch the game on TSN. So they never actually got to St. John's, Newfoundland. But Carl, and one of the things that I recall about that squad was that we were a very tight-knit group, and there was I think there was a hierarchy there as well. And the story that I best remember in terms of the culture in the group was there was myself, Ian Bridge, Bruce Wilson, and Dale Mitchell rooming together. Actually, it was at the Olympics when we were based at Harvard.
Right.
And so we get a knock at the door, and I go to the door, and there's 4 crates of Molson beer that are stacked on top of one another that are being delivered to the room. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is a setup. So what I did was I looked outside the room to see if you were somewhere just waiting to see if we accepted it or turned it down. And so in the end, they brought the beer in, and we came down to dinner that night, and you pulled the 4 of us aside and you said, hey, did you get the delivery? And obviously you were referring to the beer. And we said, yeah, we did. I'm still not sure whether you were setting us up or not. So, and you said, well, you have them because you guys are experienced enough, have been around long enough to know when you should indulge in a beer and when not to. More importantly, you can set the example for the young players as well, and make sure you keep an eye on them so that they're doing the right things, because they may not have that experience. So that approach, empowering the senior players to feel like, okay, yeah, he has a lot of confidence in us. And I know that that's something that to this day that I felt was a very smart thing to do. And you did quite often pull some of the senior guys aside and ask our opinions. You didn't, I don't think you took our opinions and adopted them, but you just got a feel for what we were thinking at that time. And I think that you established a culture in the group that you weren't asking for. You were demonstrating by your abilities to be inclusive and deal with people. And you made some hard decisions. And Tino Lettieri not playing against France in the first game was a massive decision. And Paul Dolan gets his chance, and to this day is the youngest keeper ever to play at a World Cup. So what were you thinking when you were, because culture is a word that's thrown out there. How do you establish culture? Do you demand it? I don't think that works. Or do you so go ahead.
No, you can't demand it. It's got to grow within the team. But it comes from within the team. It doesn't come from the coach. It doesn't come from any outside influence. And the coach is still on the outside, even though he'd rather not be. So what happened with the Canadian team? It was the best team I've ever coached. The effort that we gave. I mean, we qualified for the World Cup. We weren't the most skilled team in CONCACAF. We were the fittest team. I would say we were the fittest team in the World Cup, even though we didn't win the game. So the attitude of the Canadian player was terrific. I'd ask you now, and Carl, what do we have to do? Let's say soccer gets back to normal in the next 12 months. What do we have to do now to give ourselves a chance of going to the World Cup again? Don't think it's sending you at 14 to England.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do today, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what would we have to do?
Carl, do you want to, you're too quiet there, and you must be dying because you're not speaking, so go ahead.
Yeah, I just think, you know, when you look at the NASL and the Canadian Soccer League, there was no coincidence that we qualified once and the second time was the closest we got. So the new Canadian Soccer League that is allowing a lot of Canadian players to hone their skills is going to be very, very important. And the decisions they make going forward, I believe, you know, personally, that then that's going to be a lot of collaboration. People need to go out and support the league. I think it get better as a North American Soccer League, the old Canadian Soccer League. There, as it's given time, it'll get better. The product will get better. The players will get better. But hopefully, there's lots of collaboration as well, because you have the provinces and the MLS teams and the Canadian Soccer League. And I think if we all work together, which I don't think happens too often, and you can speak maybe more to that, Bobby, they can't do it on their own. They will obviously need support, the sponsors and the fans and the other organizations. And I think if we pool our resources together, then we can help still grow the game through all the various organizations. And that's going to give us the best chance. I mean, that's what happened in America when, you know, I think it was Carlos Queiroz, the guy that coached Portugal. I think he coached in New York.
Yes.
He was given a year to just go across America and look at the landscape and what they needed to do. And he had still got a copy of the document. And he said, if you don't adhere to the first 10 pages of this document, just rip it up and throw it away. And most of it was how they needed to come together and collaborate, all the organizations across the board. And I don't know if they completely did that, but it certainly, they did some collaboration, and they've gone from strength to strength. And I think that's what we need to do. Bobby?
Yeah, I think that I agree with all of that. And if all of the stakeholders, the provinces, the MLS clubs, the CPL clubs, were the CSA, were all to throw their inventory on the table, and then determine who's best to perform the different functions. And clearly, the game at the grassroots level. I know that registration is down across the country, and I think that's probably in large part due to kids being inactive. But I do believe that the numbers will stay strong. The recreational game, I think we could probably safely say we're probably as good as anyone in the world in that regard. It's what happens to the players when they get to the stage where they need to be playing against the best players, and if we could figure out a way whereby that could become a part of the growth of players, then I think that's ultimately going to make the difference. So in the United States now, they've actually, the MLS, have now taken control of player development and have established a new league, and have gone away from the Academy League. And I think it's great, because the disparity in playing levels from one team to the next was quite significant. And when you're hopping on a plane to go to California and you win a game 6 or 7-0, you're spending a lot of money, and what's that doing for development? So I'm excited about what's happening with that league, and obviously we'll be a part of that. I'm also excited about the CPL. I've always been a believer that that you need your different levels of the sport to ensure that kids, when they are young, have a look at what's ahead and they know how to navigate their way through that pathway if they're good enough players. So that's something that's still ongoing, and I hope that we continue to grow in providing those better opportunities for those elite younger players. Having said that, I actually still believe that the current group of players that we've got, there's no reason why we shouldn't be finishing top 4. We've got to get to the hex, and unfortunately, well, at least when play stopped, we were on the outside of that, and it was going to be difficult to actually get into the top 6. So we've got a little bit of a road to go there, but I think that group of players, and I think that that John and his coaching staff are certainly capable of getting us to the next World Cup. And then, of course, we're hosting in 2026. So there's a short term. Being at 2022 would be unbelievable for the sport in Canada, because we'd be there and people would see us on the world stage. And then the World Cup's coming to our region, which I think will allow for another 4 years of continued growth as well. So on that note, I don't know, how much time do we have, Richard?
Well, we've got 15 minutes, but
okay.
If you have a bit more time, we can stay a bit.
Actually, yeah, I just wanted to, there's a comment here from someone that asked about the first game in Mexico against France. Carl, why don't you provide, well, Tony, you can provide your thoughts, Carl, you yours, and then I can sweep up.
And Carl, I'll just say that the full question was asking, do you consider that performance against France as the best Canadian performance at the World Cup? And if so, what were the changes in terms of the game plan, the way you played in the subsequent 2 games against Soviet Union and Hungary? So.
The game, if we look back at it, we lost on the 1 goal. And Paul Dolan, youngest goalkeeper to ever play in the World Cup, had done well on the goal, and Bobby's got to look at himself, I've got to look at myself, Dolan's got to look at himself. You might have got that goal, Bobby.
Oh, no question. I assumed, and I made the most elementary of mistakes. I assumed he was catching it, and right. I stopped. And but the French player, and I can't remember who it was behind me, took. Sorry?
Papin?
No, Papin scored, but the guy behind me actually, doing the instinctive thing that forwards do. He just made the run as if it would get there, and sure enough, I have my hands up in the air, motioning it's going for a goal kick. And then the next thing you know, he cuts in behind me and heads it back across the goal for a Papin tap in. But so I certainly played a part in that. And that, I think there was 9 minutes to go at that stage, and we had taken a lot of their pressure, and we're starting to actually look more like the team that was going to score.
Right. And my role was not to sort out the throw-in where they were able to cross the ball. And I had done it in practice. So mark the thrower so they can't be played back to him, but we didn't mark the throw. And I hadn't emphasised enough making sure they didn't get the crossing, because the cross did it.
It was actually Val Fernandez, very good player. That I think, and it was a long cross. It was 30 yards deep and well wide. So, I mean, and that's part of the I guess the negative side of playing in a place like Mexico where you're dealing with altitude. I think Dolly thought he had it, and I think the ball just took off a little bit, and he was underneath it.
I think, Tony, if you look at,
because we're probably running out of time, but the league, the Canadian league that we set up, a new player coach with the Vancouver 86ers produced some very good players. When you think of it.
Yeah.
What's his name? The Italian who went to England.
Navilo?
Who?
Dominic Navilo?
Oh, Dominic was a good player.
Oh, Paul Pescasolito.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Was he Italian?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, players were coming out of that. Mark Watson had a career, and you know, with the new league, let's hope the same thing happens. But what I'd like to see happen is a group of players that we still haven't sourced properly for the game, and that's the players from the inner cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because they don't play, the inner city kids don't play in community soccer because they can't afford to. It's a middle class sport. And I'm not saying that Alfonso Davis type players there, but I've been in the inner city areas and some very good players. We need to get them into the system.
Yeah. The question that you asked, Richard, about the following two games against Hungary and Russia, right after our game against France, we watched Russia destroy Hungary 6-0.
Yes.
And Hungary were going into the World Cup as one of the dark horses to actually win it.
Yes.
And I think what happened was, so we went from playing on fear, going out against the French team. I can remember standing in the tunnel, a narrow tunnel, and looking at their team, Platini, Tigana, Gires, Amoros, and it was a who's who of players. And so we go out and we do well, but we went out realizing that we had to do everything within our power to follow the game plan and minimize the French attack. And then I think we watched Russia beat Hungary, and we're thinking, I know that I didn't go in with the same sort of intensity in the Hungary game that I did against France. And I think, you know, we probably thought, they got beat 6-0. We were actually competitive against France. We just need to turn up. Well, mistake. And they scored early in the game, and we never really recovered from that. Carl, you're again, thoughts?
Yeah, I think to answer the question, obviously, probably France. Well, without doubt, France was the best performance we had, because I think I didn't know. I think you said that Platini, when some of the reporters kind of suggested that it was kind of they squeaked through, but it was a nothing game, and he gave us a lot of credit for how we played, and yeah, I mean, it was there was in 10 minutes of getting a result. And they had to earn it at the end of the day, and it was a shame. It was kind of a goal that we give them, because they had some good chances. They were one of the favourites, and you're probably right. After that game, it gave us a lot, a bigger belief in ourselves, and probably a little bit naive in going in thinking, well, okay, now we show up and we may get a result against Hungary, not Russia, because they were still one of the favourites. But I don't think there can be anything other than pride of how we performed. You guys, I only played in the last game, but I think you guys had 13 qualifying games to get to the World Cup. It was a marathon. And at the end of the day, when we got to the World Cup, we definitely didn't disappoint ourselves.
Tony, there's a great question on to you, Tony. Would you advise teams to work on shadow soccer as part of training positioning? And I can remember taking part, and when you arrived at the Whitecaps, we did a lot of that. And I'll be honest with you now, yeah, it was pretty tedious. Having said that, when I became a coach, it is the best way to actually based on different areas of the field that the ball is in when you're defending, where everybody should be. And so I'm assuming you still think that shadow soccer should be a part of training.
I had first-hand experience with a guy called Alan Brown who perfected the method. And tell you what, it was boring. So what I tried to do in shadow play, you know, it's 11 against nobody. You have a bit of a chance of winning it, it allows you to look at the patterns of play. And what I would do is try to use it as part of the warm-up. So, you know, run and then stop and do some stretching and then go on again. But I've found it, so be very careful with shadow play. Because, you know, as you say, you found it boring, didn't you?
Yes, I did actually. But it was definitely something that, if you break it all down, it was well worth doing. And I think it also depends on how much time you take at it. And I don't think we ever went overly lengthy, but yeah, it wasn't the part of training that I was looking forward to the most, but it was a part of training that I think I did gain a better perspective on positional play, not only my position, but of my colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Guys, I've got one audience question, which I think is a decent one, and maybe a good one before we wrap it up. Was there any player you feel should have been on the roster that wasn't?
That's Tony's question, I think.
Yeah, we'll start with Tony. Yeah.
I think if we got Pele and got him to defect to Canada, he probably would have been a good one to have around. No, I don't think so. I think we were pretty thorough in seeing where our players were, and we gave them a chance as well, because we played a lot of games. You know, we'd go anywhere to play a game, provided they paid the expenses, because we didn't have any money. In 84, was it, when the league went under?
85, I think, when you made the trip to Africa. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
And you know, there was a problem. I mean, Tino Lettieri was our most experienced goalkeeper, and even though he was a bit flaky, he was a good goalkeeper, very good. But Dolby got in because Tino was playing indoor, and they wouldn't release him for practices. So when we went to Mexico, he hadn't been in training camp for more than 2 or 3 days. And that, you know, sort of summed up the game in North America at the time. The indoor soccer actually took the place of the North American Soccer League. It's not survived, I'm pleased to say. It's not. We still play indoor soccer, but it's not the game, and it's certainly not the place to prepare for World Cup play.
Tony, the thing that I've heard you say since 1986 was the 4 players that were being coached by Alan Arrington that were left behind. We had a roster of 22 and we took 18, and I've heard you say that if you had it all to do again, you'd have actually brought those players.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking too much of getting the right atmosphere, but at the time, I mean, what we do today, everyone gets on the bench, and they can put the players on wherever they want. But what would happen in those days is, after you picked your 16 or whatever it was, the rest sat in the stand. And I remember George Pecos, who'd done great things for us. Coming
Yeah.
on for John Catlett when he got injured, scored 2 goals in 2 games. He was sat in the stand and very frustrated by it.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, no, those 4 players missed a great opportunity, and I was the person to blame for it.
Well, it is just about 3 o'clock here Eastern time, and I guess that makes it noon for you guys on the West Coast. We'll wrap it up. Maybe before we do, I'll leave it up to Tony, Bob, or Carl, or any of the 3 of you. Any parting thoughts, and maybe talk a little bit more just about, let's say, the future of Canadian soccer and the men's national team. And I know you spoke a little bit about World Cup qualification and the CPL and where things are going. So talk a little bit about what you see in the future, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, I'll say CPL, very important. Inner city players, very important. If you get those 2 groups going at it, I think we'll put ourselves in a great chance of qualifying again.
Bobby, anything to add? Carl?
Well, I mean, I think from if I just look at, and I'm going to lump in Canada to the United States. If I look at the what we had with the North American Soccer League, and certainly what we had in between the North American Soccer League and MLS, that was equally important. The NASL had the established players coming from other countries, had the profile, and then when that finished, and Carl made the point that the CSL was a very important part of keeping the better players in the game,
Yeah.
and allowing them to move on. In the case of Pescalito, Alex Bumbry, going on and playing at a good level in Europe. So I think we kind of kept the game going. We kept the game going, and then with the advent of TFC and MLS, and then ourselves in Montreal, I don't think there's the league MLS could be any better positioned than to continue to grow. When you look at the recent amount that Carolina paid, $270 million, and now that the league is at 32 confirmed teams, and it's going to have to stop at some point, which is only going to increase the value of the franchise. So that aspect of our sport, the highest level in Canada, the United States, it's not going away. It's here to stay, and that's great, because that gives young Carl Valentine's, young Bob Lenarduzzi's that realization that there is something to strive for at the top. And then if in the case of an Alfonso, to go beyond that. So that's good. That's there. Then beneath that, we have the USL in the United States, and we have the CPL in Canada. And it's important that both and USL have gone from a league that paid owners to get involved in their league to now I think it's up to 10 million for a franchise in that league.
Yeah.
So that's established. That's the second tier. Then you've got the CPL in Canada, and if that can continue to grow, it's a great place for players that for whatever reason haven't had that chance at the MLS level to prove people wrong. And we're going to see players that are coming or in MLS that are going to go on and play at an MLS club and possibly beyond that. So that's an important part of our infrastructure. Then it's the youth side, which I think is a little foggier right now. But I think it's clear for me that what we need to actually have happen is that we need to get that right, because that's where players develop their habits. And but the best part of it now is that there is this pathway above it. Still needs a lot of work, but we need to figure out the development side of the game. And as a club, we're investing upwards of $3 million in player development, and we're going to continue to do that at the Whitecaps. TFC are the same, Impact are the same. So it's stay the course, but let's get better at providing the best possible platform for those young up and coming players. Carl?
Yeah, I think, the only thing, I had an echo from, what I said before. It was important to have a professional league for the young players. I know the provinces are looking at establishing criteria for clubs, which is going to help the young players. And the game is just on such good, solid footing right now. It's just really exciting, and we have a great opportunity. And just encourage everyone to collaborate even more and pool all our resources, and we'll get it right.
Okay, well, thank you all very much again for your time. It was a great discussion, and as I said, I stayed in the background. I thought it went well. So Tony, Bob, and Carl, again, thank you. Hope you're staying safe and healthy, and looking forward to things getting back to normal with soccer. And we'll stay in touch, and we'll make this available, video available for you guys in a little bit. And I've posted a little notice to everyone attending. We'll put it up for NSCAC members by the end of the week. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.